Hi, I'm George Daniels from the University of Alabama, one of the 2024-25 Master Fellows. Looking forward to seeing everyone in Chicago in just a few days. But as we put the finishing touches on the schedule, the Master Fellows thought it would be a great idea if we had a little bit of a preview of what it means for you to have a third of your course completed as you go through the Institute. You're going to essentially be presenting a third of your course on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. So what does that involve? What does that look like? And I'm going to just take a part of my class, which is on race, gender, and media, and walk you through that process, including when you're doing the searching for clips and video stories from the History Makers Digital Archive. So I'm going to share my screen. This won't take very long because typically during the Institute, you'll have about 10 to 15 minutes to share, present, and then about 5 minutes to have some questions and answers. But you can see here at the University of Alabama, we are on a 15-week semester. So a third of our course is about 5 weeks. And so you'll present 5 weeks at a time if you're on a 15-week cycle. It doesn't matter necessarily whether your class is once a week or twice a week, or like my class is 3 days a week. You want to think about your units in terms of what you're covering topic-wise week to week. You'll also notice on here that the outline of the course also includes the search terms, because primarily what we want to promote during the course of the Institute is how do you use searching of the digital archive as a way to front end the involvement, the empowerment of your students to use the archive in accomplishing the learning objectives of your class. So it's not so much the people as it is the strategy for finding the wisdom of the history makers in the archive. And that comes with the use of search terms. So we're going to really ask everyone to put search terms on the syllabus and explain that even on the first day, why the syllabus doesn't just have dates or topics, but it has search terms as well. This is a little different than we probably would normally teach, but there's definitely a method to this particular strategy. So in this particular part of my class, obviously I'm introducing the class. The first week is a little bit of a misnomer. It's not really a week, it's one day, because our semester starts on a Wednesday, and the Friday of that week is a department holiday because we have a faculty retreat. So we only have one class that first week, and then on week 3, that's Labor Day week, and so we only have 2 classes that week. But I still have a topic, and I still intend to introduce history makers in at least some brief form on that very first day of the semester. And so the other thing that's happening in this class at the very beginning is we're introducing the digital archive as a part of a larger effort to get students to learn how to use digital humanities tools to present what they learn from using the archive. So they're not just going to write a narrative like a paper in our class, but they're going to do a project that's a culminating project at the end of the semester. And so we do that by introducing metadata, and I'll show you in just a second how we talk about that in terms of a digital archive. And so I'm going to walk you through just the process of building the material based on this outline using the digital archive. I mentioned earlier the metadata. The whole idea behind talking about metadata, which are data about data, is to have them looking at the interviews already at the very beginning of the semester as being artifacts that they will then integrate into their end of semester projects. So when we use the term metadata, we're talking about pieces of information that are able to identify elements of an archive. In this case, who is the person speaking? Where was that person interviewed? Who was the publisher of that particular piece of information? When was it done? Those become metadata. And so in the case of the history makers, this is just something taken from the public website just to identify who the history maker is, when was the interview done, what category that particular history maker falls in. Is it a media maker? In my class, which I teach journalism and media, 90% of people we're talking about in this class, especially in a media class, are going to be people who are in the media makers. However, when we start doing our searches, that will definitely not be the case. There'll be others who are not media makers. But we introduced this concept of metadata very early in the semester. So this is another way to integrate history makers. It's a little different than we're going to spend most of our time, which is on getting to actually searching the archive and seeing what we find. And so you'll notice in the schedule, week 5 focuses on Latinos in media. There's a Latinos Beyond Real documentary that we will watch a part of in class, and I may assign as an extra assignment for them to watch the full video. It's available via our streaming service, Canopy. But in class, we'll watch a little bit of that from that documentary, along with an assigned reading called Batman in the Barrio. We're able to help the students to begin to build a foundation for the topic that we're teaching. And so Batman in the Barrio is a reading from the main textbook for the class, which is Race, Gender, Class, and Media. And this is an updated edition that just came out last year in 2023. And so I did not use this book last year in the class, but I am returning to it this semester, and I'm making some updates on my reading assignments. So Batman in the Barrio is a reading. We have the video, but now what can the archive do to help us understand this topic? And so I've identified these search terms from the reading, and I've thought about what I want them to learn. I didn't use Latino, I probably could, but I used Latinx because it was in the reading. And you see here that only one video or clip, one story came up when I used Latinx, and it wasn't a very good one. It was from 2017. Why? Because that term is a very recent term. When we use words like Mexican or Mexican culture or Chicano, there are plenty of examples of clips in the archive. And so as I go through those particular clips, I whittle them down to the best ones that are going to help extend the lesson. And here are the ones I selected for that particular unit. This is a playlist, and this is what you want to have for each one of the units of your class as you're sharing a portion of your class 3 times during the semester, 3 times during the institute, I should say. And so these particular clips happen to all be men. That's not a good thing. Although I'm not going to use them all on the same day, you do want to have some gender diversity among the history makers when you're using them in the class. More importantly, though, for this particular example, it is why I would use these particular clips. And I'm just going to talk about one of them, just the way you would do at the Institute, is play one. So the one I want to play is from Gerald Johnson. However, this is not a live link. This is a picture of my playlist. And so to get to my live link, I've got to go to actually make sure I pulled that playlist from the archive. And so this is what in my archive, when I'm logged in, this is what the playlist looks like when it says share my clips. When I share my playlist or share my clips, this is what I end up with. The problem with this is only people at the University of Alabama can see this playlist. So one of the things you're going to learn in the very beginning of the Institute is how to update that link, fix it, if you will, so that anyone who has access to the History Makers Digital Archive can get to the actual clip list or playlist. And that involves converting the dashes to dots and taking out the local library element in the link. In this case, libdata.ua.edu is the local information that I want to take out of this link. And so the end result is this particular link, which is actually helping me to go to the archive no matter where I'm coming from. So you see I highlighted the 2 dots and the space that I removed where I took out libdata.lib.ua.edu. You want to get students in the habit of doing this from the very first assignment. When they turn in those links, make sure they're not localized to the University of Alabama. Otherwise, others can't play their list. And so at that point, if I were in class, I would hop out of the presentation, as I'm doing now, highlight my playlist. That's my link, and go to my browser. So I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to reshare from the browser. Make sure that I'm sharing sound. And now I'm in my browser, which in this case is Chrome. And when I put that link in Chrome, it takes me to this page. This is an easy proxy, which says you got to authenticate where you're going to be logging into the digital archive. So here's where I'm going to do that. It prompts me to do my login, which I'm going to do here live. I hope that this works. I don't have to do a duo. It does work. Okay, now I've authenticated, and now I'm at my playlist. This is a live playlist. You can always tell because when you mouse over it, everything turns blue. The clip turns blue. This is the clip that I want to play. Now, during the Institute, we will have already done this. If you're not the first presenter, you would have already done this with another school, so you shouldn't have to authenticate every time. It'll just continue with whoever was last on the computer. But here is the clip that I want to play.
What was what's the biggest story that Charlotte Post is covering?
Let me stop and say, when we introduce this in class, we would explain the history maker is Gerald Johnson, who was a publisher of one of the longest running Black newspapers, certainly in North Carolina, but in the country, called the Charlotte Post. I happen to be a subscriber of the Charlotte Post. Charlotte is not an area that we normally associate with being a mecca for Latinos or Hispanics. But in this particular story, Mr. Johnson, who's been interviewed 20 years ago, talks about how his newspaper was on the national stage because of its coverage of Hispanics.
The biggest in terms of just national attention was we did we did a story on the Hispanic population. We have a fast growing Hispanic population in Charlotte, and a lot of the Hispanic population is moving into predominantly Black neighborhoods. And we just went out to find out how that was impacting the African American communities. And we heard a lot of statements that were racist in content. The same things that people said about us when we were moving, when African Americans were moving into white communities. Some of the same verbiage that we used to hear doing that was repeated by African Americans about Hispanics moving. Myths.
What Hispanic group is moving predominantly?
Predominantly is Mexicans. It's predominantly Mexicans moving in to Charlotte, even though there are other classes of Hispanics moving in, but the predominant, especially moving into the African American communities, are Mexicans. And so we ran the story. The story was picked up by NNPA, put on their website, it was put on our website. A national news company out of Atlanta picked it up and ran it on the air nationally. Then another Florida company ran it on the air nationally, and then Rush Limbaugh picked it up. And before long, we were getting calls from everywhere, and then we were getting calls from Hispanic groups cursing us out about whatever. And we did the flip side as well. We went into one of the communities that's predominantly a Hispanic community now, and a young lady that used to work for us speaks fluent Spanish. We took her to interview some Hispanics, and she literally got the exact same story about how the Hispanic population felt about African Americans, and we ran that. So the two-part series actually snowballed with attention. We went from we get about 10,000 hits, with 10,000 visitors per week on our website. In that particular 3-month period, jumped from 10,000 to like 90,000 hits per week. Just people wanted to read that story and then emailing us their comments about it. And so that one was really, really, really big. It got to be so controversial that NNPA couldn't take the heat, and they took it off of their website. They removed the story altogether, and had when you clicked on the story, it gave you this little message about we aren't racist, and so we decided that we would remove this from our site. But it really got hot and heavy.
And so that hot and heavy experience was a really good example of the intersection between race and specifically the Latino and Hispanic experience and the media. It helped the students to understand a real example happening in a community, in this case, generated by a historically Black newspaper, the Charlotte Post, in a community that is experiencing demographic shifts. That's an interesting way to show this type of diversity, in this case, diversity of race, and how it connects to the media. And that's why I like that particular clip. I know that there are many others that we could share. On the previous slide, the one in the upper left-hand corner from Terry Jones talks about a new channel that started on the television side to promote the experiences of those who are Latino or Hispanic. If we have more time, I'd share that particular clip also. But the most important thing is when you're sharing this third of your class, you want to walk through exactly why you use that clip. In this case, you want to have your playlist ready, and we went through that process. But then you want to show how that fits into the other units that are in your class. And so that is actually week 5. Before week 5, we do have a unit that focuses on connecting the topic of race to our local area, as in Alabama, as in Tuscaloosa, Alabama, as in the University of Alabama. And by using those search terms, I was able to find some interesting clips that speak about the experiences of African Americans specifically in the city of Tuscaloosa. In one example, which I'll share with you another time, there was a journalist by the name of George Carey who began Emerge magazine. He is from Tuscaloosa, and he did go to the University of Alabama, but it's not something he shares widely. Now he's passed on, but in the HistoryMakers interview, he explained not only his decision to go to the University of Alabama for 1 year and his experience in Tuscaloosa, but also how he was able to negotiate the campus as a Black man from Tuscaloosa in a very different time than now. And so that is one of the great benefits of using the archive. Another history maker you see here, Paul Delaney, was actually the chair of our journalism program, the only African American who's ever chaired a department of journalism and now journalism creative media in the history of the university. He actually worked at the New York Times. And so another student has actually brought that clip to class. So I'm just showing you the kind of things you want to be able to share. That's the playlist that goes with that particular unit. And then I have another unit on stereotypes. This was a playlist I put together for stereotypes. If we have more time, we go through that. But essentially, what you want to be doing is building a playlist and a syllabus section to share each of those 3 internal days, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. And so I would encourage you in the few days we have before we go to Chicago to start thinking about what you would share about the first third of your class, because you're going to have to be able to share that very quickly after we get settled in Chicago. With that in mind, I also want to remind you to make sure you have these. You're going to need headphones because you're going to be doing a lot of listening to the archive, even in a group setting, like we might be having a time to pick clips and we don't want to hear each other's laptops. So you do want to have some headphones. I think these are better than AirPods or earbuds, but everybody has their own. I like to have the over the ear headphones where I can hear it in a stereo sound. have something like that you can listen to clips on site while we're at Jenner and Block. With that in mind, I'm going to wrap up and look forward to seeing you in Chicago in just a few days.